I don't know if you were alive back then, but perhaps you remember the My Lai Massacre. I think it was in '68. Toward the end of the Vietnamese War, when all us teens were shaking in our boots, waiting to see what the next draft lottery would be. And if you don't remember that, let me tell you how the draft lottery went because I was in it. They had this on TV. You were assigned a number depending on your birth date and year. So if you were born January 1st, you had number one. January 2nd, number two, and on through the year. And then they would have the lottery for those people that were going to be drafted come on early in the year, maybe at the end of the previous year. Can't remember for sure. And they had a cage, a round cage, like a rotisserie cage. And in there were ping pong balls with numbers on them. And they had a host, like a game show. And the co host was, of course, a beautiful young woman in a somewhat revealing outfit. And they began the lottery by flipping the cage around, and all the different balls in there would be spinning, and they would stop it. Then the lady would take out one ball, hand it to the host, and announce the number. 175, for instance. Then, if you were a 175, you were the first to go, unless you could find a way out. And of course, a lot of guys our age tried to find a way out. Some of the things that were done were absolutely crazy, like you could take a chemical called bromethymol blue, and it caused you to urinate blue and green. And supposedly, if you urinated green, then they wouldn't take you because that was a sign of a bladder infection. So my friends and I, we took a trip to Quebec. We had just a little bit of money and an old junky Rambler, 1963 Rambler. Drove up, deciding we were going to check out whether we ought to go to Canada or not. I knew that I would be killed if I went over there. And it was by this time that everyone knew that what they were sending to the front lines were just cannon fodder. About 500 a day were being killed. If you were on the front line, you had a 7-second life expectancy. And through my middle school years, I was a debater, and I debated against the Vietnam War when the sentiment of America was very much for it, because they had been fed so many lies about what was going on there. Primarily, then, later on, the head of all operations there, General McNamara, in a tearful confession, confessed on a television special that the war turned out to be all about money and economy, and that he colluded with the president, Johnson, at that time to keep the war going for that account, because they were trying to create the Great Society, and in order to do that, they needed lots of money, lots of taxes. They wanted to keep the war going. Well, my friends and I, we got up to London, Ontario, or almost there, about 100 miles away, and the car blew up. So we we were some little town, and we spent the rest of our money to get the car fixed. And that got us the next 100 miles to London, Ontario, where it broke down for good. So we stayed at a friend's rescue mission there and decided to parlay the rest of the stuff that we had, with the exception of our camping equipment, at a pawn shop. And we bought tickets, round trip tickets, as far north as we could go. Our journey's end was to be a town up on Lake Pascalis in Quebec, and the name of the town was Pascalis. We had a reason for picking that town out, but we took the train then from Ontario up through Quebec and on up into Indian country there towards Pascalis through Noranda, Quebec. Stayed one night in Noranda, couldn't find a place to stay, and up there they were murdering Americans that were coming up to supposedly avoid the draft. We were told this by churches that we went by. We wanted to camp out in the backyard of the church until our next train came. Couldn't find any. So we ended up having our best night of all in Quebec in jail as vagrants, because we were afraid of getting killed. And so we went to jail, and then we went on up the next day to Quebec, and the train just kept shorter, getting shorter and shorter and shorter. And we finally came to the Pascalis stop, and there was no town there. All there was a little box-like structure beside the railroad track with an old telephone in it certainly from the 1920s, with a dry cell battery that had long dried up. And we said, as they stopped the train for us, so we got off, "Where's the town?" I said, "Well, we never been to the town. But this is where the old stop was. We don't stop here anymore. I don't know how you got a ticket here, but you did. So you get out." And so we did get out, and we found out from some of the locals that Pascalis had sunk into the earth, that there had been a hollow part of the earth, and the whole town had sunk about 30 years before. So there was no town there at all. All that was there was a little bar and restaurant, and it was on the outskirts about 5 miles away. So we took the stuff that we had, a little bit of food and some camping equipment, and hauled it into the jungle there. It's a huge forest up there around this lake. It was off season. There were a cottage here and there, not too many. Nobody was there. And that was the beginning of a pretty incredible journey. But yes, the intention was, if we got picked in the lottery, to go up and stay up there. We had a friend that was staying with us at the time. He got picked like number 3. He got out of it because he was too short, if you can believe that. But that was only the beginning of the journey. That was in 1970. This massacre happened in 68, I believe, late 68. It was all over the newspapers that several groups of United States military had gone crazy in Vietnam and started shooting up everything they could find, down, even going so low as to massacring villages. And several groups of these soldiers, when they came around what was going on, they caught it. They caught this mass evil, and they began to fall into it and do the same thing, as though it were something outside of them rather than inside. Well, I just wanted to tell you my little story here. And I've got this queued up anytime you want it, Rich.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. I'm going to share the screen, share the computer sound. There's Scott Peck. And here we go. You let me know if you can hear it all right.
On the morning of March 16th, 1968, elements of Task Force Barker moved into a small group of hamlets known collectively as My Lai in the Quang Ngai province of South Vietnam. It was intended to be a typical search and destroy mission. That is, the American troops were searching for Viet Cong soldiers so as to destroy them. Relative to other units operating in Vietnam, the troops of Task Force Barker had been somewhat hastily trained and thrown together. In the previous month, they had achieved no military success. Unable to engage the enemy, they had themselves sustained a number of casualties from mines and booby traps. The province was considered to be a Viet Cong stronghold, one in which the civilians aided and abetted the guerrillas to such a degree that it was often difficult to distinguish the combatants from the non-combatants. Army intelligence had indicated that Viet Cong were being harbored by the villagers of My Lai. The task force expected to find combatants there. On the eve of the operation, there seemed to be a mood of anticipation. The nature of the instructions given to the enlisted men and junior officers that evening by the senior officers was at best ambiguous in regard to the distinction between combatants and non-combatants. Although essentially all elements of Task Force Barker were involved one way or another in the operation, the primary element of ground troops directly involved was C Company. When Charlie Company moved into the hamlets of My Lai, they discovered not a single combatant. None. None of the Vietnamese was armed. No one fired on them. They found only unarmed women, children, and old men. Some of the things that then happened are unclear. What is clear, however, is that the troops of C Company killed at least somewhere between 500 and 600 of those unarmed villagers. The most large-scale killings occurred in the particular hamlet of My Lai 4. There, the 1st Platoon of Charlie Company, under the command of Lieutenant William L. Calley, Jr., herded villagers into groups of 20 to 40 or more, who were then slaughtered by rifle fire, machine gun fire, or grenades. It is important to remember, however, that substantial numbers of unarmed civilians also were murdered in the other hamlets of My Lai that day by the troops of other platoons under the command of other officers. The killing took a long time. It went on throughout the morning. The number of soldiers involved can only be estimated. Perhaps only about 50 actually pulled triggers. Approximately 200 directly witnessed the killings. We might suppose that within the week, at least 500 men in Task Force Barker knew that war crimes had been committed. The failure to report a crime is itself a crime. In the year that followed, no one in Task Force Barker attempted to report the atrocities that had occurred at My Lai. The fact that the American public learned about My Lai at all was due solely to a letter that Ron Ridenour wrote at the end of March 1969 to several congressmen about the atrocities, more than a year after they had occurred. Ridenour had not himself been a part of Task Force Barker, but had later heard of the atrocities in idle conversation from friends who had been at My Lai, and he wrote his letter 3 months after his return to civilian life. In the spring of 1972, I was chairman of a committee of 3 psychiatrists appointed by the Army Surgeon General at the request of the Chief of Staff of the Army to make recommendations for research that might shed light on the psychological causes of My Lai, so as to help prevent such atrocities in the future. The research we proposed was rejected by the General Staff of the Army, reportedly on the grounds that it could not be kept secret and might prove embarrassing to the administration, and that, quote, further embarrassment was not desirable at the time, unquote. The rejection of the recommendations of the Committee for Research is symbolic of several issues. One is that any research into the nature of evil is likely to prove embarrassing, not only to those who are the designated subjects of the research, but also to the researchers themselves. If we are to study the nature of human evil, it is doubtful how clearly we will be able to separate them from us. It will most likely be our own natures we are examining. Undoubtedly, this potential for embarrassment is one of the reasons we have thus far failed to develop a psychology of evil. The rejection by the General Staff of our recommendations for research also highlights the fact that in considering the evil at My Lai, as in all our other considerations of evil, we suffer from a simple lack of scientific knowledge. Therefore, much of what follows is only speculative. Triggers are pulled by individuals. Orders are given and executed by individuals. In the last analysis, every single human act is ultimately the result of an individual choice. Not one of the individuals who participated in the atrocities in My Lai, or in their cover-up, is blameless. In books 1 and 2, our focus has been on specific individuals whom I have labeled evil and distinguished from the vast majority of other individuals I have designated not evil. Even if we allow that this sharp distinction is somewhat arbitrary, that there is a whole continuum between those who are thoroughly evil and those who are not at all evil, we are left facing a problem. How is it that approximately 500 men, the majority of whom were undoubtedly not evil as individuals, could all have participated in an act as monstrously evil as that at My Lai? Clearly, to understand My Lai, our focus must not be limited solely to individual evil and individual choice. We are now, therefore, concentrating on the phenomenon of group evil as being somewhat distinct from, although in many respects similar to, the phenomenon of individual evil. For many years it has seemed to me that human groups tend to behave in much the same ways as human individuals, except at a level that is more primitive and immature than one might expect. Why this is so, why the behavior of groups is strikingly immature, why they are from a psychological standpoint less than the sum of their parts, is a question for which there is more than one right answer. One of those is the problem of specialization. Whenever the roles of individuals within a group become specialized, it becomes both possible and easy for the individual to pass the moral buck to some other part of the group. In this way, not only does the individual forsake his conscience, but the conscience of the group as a whole can become so fragmented and diluted as to be non-existent. Bearing in mind the psychological immaturity of groups, we shall be examining aspects of both the My Lai crimes, the atrocities themselves, and their cover-up. Although the cover-up may seem less atrocious than the atrocities, they are all part of the same ball of wax. How is it that so many individuals could have participated in such a monstrous evil without any of them being so conscience-stricken as to be compelled to confess? The cover-up was a gigantic group lie. Lying is simultaneously one of the symptoms and one of the causes of evil. It is why this book is entitled People of the Lie. Certainly by virtue of their extraordinary communal participation in the cover-up, The men of Task Force Barker were a people of the lie. By the time we are finished, we may even conclude that the American people, at least during those war years, were also a people of the lie. As with any lie, the primary motive of the cover-up was fear. The individuals who had committed the crimes, who had pulled the triggers or given the orders, obviously had reason to fear reporting what they had done. Court-martial awaited them. But I suspect there is another extremely significant reason that the crimes of My Lai went unreported for so long. I offer it purely as conjecture that to a considerable extent the members of Task Force Barker did not confess their crimes simply because they were not aware that they had committed them. They knew, of course, what they had done, but I suspect that many of them did not even consider it a crime. They did not confess because they did not realize they had anything to confess. How can this be? How can a sane man commit murder and not know he has murdered? How is it that a person who is not basically evil may participate in monstrous evil without the awareness of what he has done? It is this question that will serve as a focal point for the discussion that follows on the relationship between individual and group evil. I believe that anyone who has been in significant chronic pain or prolonged discomfort will recognize that we humans naturally, almost inevitably, tend to regress. Our psychological growth reverses itself. Our maturity is forsaken. Quite rapidly, we become more childish, more primitive. Discomfort is stress. The fact of the matter is that the troops of Task Force Barker were in a chronically stressful situation. They were at the other end of the world from their homes. The food was poor, the insects thick, the heat enervating, the sleeping quarters uncomfortable. Then there was the danger, more stressful because it was so unpredictable. Besides regression, there is another mechanism whereby human beings respond to stress. It is a mechanism of defense. Robert J. Lifton, who studied the survivors of Hiroshima and other disasters, has called it psychic numbing. In a situation in which our emotional feelings are overwhelmingly painful or unpleasant, we have the capacity to anesthetize ourselves. The sight of a single bloody, mangled body horrifies us. But if we see such bodies all around us every day, day after day, the horrible becomes normal, and we lose our sense of horror. We no longer truly see the blood, or smell the stench, or feel its agony. Unconsciously, we have become anesthetized. When it no longer bothers us to see mangled bodies, it will no longer bother us to mangle them ourselves. It is difficult indeed to selectively close our eyes to a certain type of brutality without closing them to all brutality. How can we render ourselves insensitive to brutality except by becoming brutes? I think we can assume, therefore, that after a month in the field with Task Force Barker, a month of poor food, of poor sleep, of seeing comrades killed or maimed, the average soldier was more psychologically immature, primitive, and brutish than he might otherwise have been in a time and place of less stress. In Book 1, I spoke of the relationship between narcissism and evil, and said that narcissism is a condition out of which human beings normally mature. We may think of evil, then, as a kind of immaturity. Immature humans are more prone to evil than mature ones. And since we normally regress in the face of stress, can we not say that human beings are more likely to be evil in times of stress than in times of comfort? As we shall see, this is but one of many factors that accounted for the evil at My Lai. Individuals not only routinely regress in times of stress, they also regress in group settings. One aspect of this regression is the phenomenon of dependency on the leader. It is quite remarkable. Most people would rather be followers. More than anything else, it is probably a matter of laziness. It is simply easy to follow, and much easier to be a follower than a leader. There is no need to agonize over complex decisions, plan ahead, exercise initiative, risk unpopularity, or exert much courage. The problem is that the individual adult becomes psychologically dependent on the leader, as a child is dependent on its parents. In this way, there is a profound tendency for the average individual to emotionally regress as soon as he becomes a group member. In the military, the dependency of the soldier on his leader is not simply encouraged, it is mandated. By nature of its mission, the military designedly and probably realistically fosters the naturally occurring regressive dependency of individuals within its groups. I have already made note of the fact that patterns of group behavior are remarkably similar to the behavior of an individual. This is because a group is an organism. It tends to function as a single entity. A group of individuals behave as a unit because of what is called group cohesiveness. There are profound forces at work within a group to keep its individual members together and in line. Probably the most powerful of these group cohesive forces is narcissism. In its simplest and most benign form, this is manifested in group pride. As the members feel proud of their group, so the group feels proud of itself. Once again, the military deliberately does more than most organizations to foster pride within its groups. It is no accident that the common term for group pride is a military one, esprit de corps. A less benign but practically universal form of group narcissism is what might be called enemy creation, or hatred of the outgroup. Task Force Barker, of course, had a pre-designated enemy, the Viet Cong. But almost inevitably, the specified enemy was generalized to include all Vietnamese. It is common knowledge that the best way to cement group cohesiveness is to ferment the group's hatred of an external enemy. Deficiencies within the group can be easily and painlessly overlooked by focusing attention on the deficiencies or sins of the outgroup. But this use of narcissism is potentially evil. In books 1 and 2, we have extensively examined the ways in which evil individuals will flee self-examination and guilt by blaming and attempting to destroy whatever or whoever highlights their deficiencies. Now we see that the same malignant narcissistic behavior comes naturally to groups. From this, it should be obvious that the failing group is the one likely to behave most evilly. Failure wounds our pride, and it is the wounded animal who is vicious. Group leaders in all places and ages have therefore routinely bolstered group cohesiveness in times of failure by whipping the group's hatred for the enemy. We will remember that at the time of My Lai, the operation of Task Force Barker had been a failure. After more than a month in the field, the enemy had still not been engaged. Yet the Americans had slowly and regularly sustained casualties. The enemy body count, however, was 0, failing in its mission, which was to kill in the first place. The group leadership was all the more hungry for blood. Given the circumstances, the hunger had become indiscriminate, and the troops would mindlessly satisfy. I have already mentioned the potential for evil in specialized groups. An important fact to bear in mind about specialization is that it is seldom either accidental or random. It is usually highly selective. Task Force Barker was a specialized group existing solely for the purpose of conducting search and destroy missions in Quang Ngai Province. What the listener may not realize, however, is the large amount of selection and self-selection involved in the creation of that group. Task Force Barker consisted either of career military personnel who had deliberately chosen the combat arms, or young grunts who had done likewise. The case of a prototypical individual may serve to illustrate some aspects of the relationship between American society in 1968, its military, and the subgroup of the military fighting in Vietnam. Let us call this prototypical individual Larry, and set the place of his origin as Iowa. The oldest of 6 children, born to an alcoholic farmhand and his tired wife, Larry was clearly a hellraiser from the time he hit puberty. Dropping out of high school as soon as he turned 16, in 1965, Larry vaguely supported himself with a series of odd jobs that proved inadequate to pay for his car insurance, gas, and heavy drinking lifestyle. In November 1966, he was apprehended attempting to rob a local gas station. The community had no desire to increase the state prison population or its tax burden, so the county judge told Larry he had 2 choices: to join the army or go to jail. Larry enlisted for Vietnam because he had heard that the girls were easy there, and besides, shooting up some gooks might be kind of fun. I do not mean to imply that Task Force Barker was made up of petty criminals like Larry, but it was not any random group of men. It was highly specialized, not only in its mission, but also in its unique composition. The specialized human composition of Task Force Barker and countless other human groups raises 3 significant issues. First is the question of the flexibility that can be expected of specialized human beings. Charlie Company was a specialized group of killers. The individuals in it had, for one reason or another, gravitated toward the killing role, as well as being deliberately seduced into that role by the system. In addition, we trained them for the role and provided them with the weapons to perform it. Is it surprising, then, given a host of other contributory circumstances, that they killed indiscriminately, or that they apparently failed to experience great guilt over what we had led them to do? Is it realistic to encourage and manipulate human beings into specialized groups and simultaneously expect them, without any significant training, to maintain a breadth of vision much beyond their specialty? A second issue is the subtle but definite scapegoating involved. The prototypical Larry was a scapegoat. When his community pushed him into the army, it was not attempting to deal with the human social problem he presented. It was simply getting rid of the problem. The people purified their own community by dumping the dirt on the military, sacrificing Larry to the god of war. And they scapegoated the military as well. It is, of course, one of the unwritten functions of the military to serve as a dumping group for some of the more misbegotten of America's youth, a sort of national reform school. But the fact that this system works rather smoothly, and not always for ill, should not blind us to the scapegoating nature of the process. By then seducing him into Vietnam, the Army, of course, further scapegoated Larry. On the one hand, it makes a definite kind of social logic. Why shouldn't those individuals like Larry, who are troublemakers and misfits, be the most appropriate candidates for cannon fodder? If someone has to be killed, why not let it be one of apparent little social value? But the decision to kill was not Larry's, nor Lieutenant County's, nor his superior officer, Captain Medina's, nor Lieutenant Colonel Barker's. It was America's decision. For whatever reason, America decided that there would be killing, and insofar as these men killed, they were all doing America's bidding. They may have seemed dirtier and less noble than the average American, but the fact is that we Americans, as a society, deliberately chose and employed them to do our killing. our dirty work for us. In this sense, they were all our scapegoats. And this is the third issue we must look at. It is not only possible but easy and even natural for a large group to commit evil without emotional involvement, simply by turning loose its specialists. It happened in Vietnam. It happened in Nazi Germany. I am afraid it will happen again. What we need to learn is that whenever we create specialty groups, we are creating the dangerous possibility that our right hand will not know what our left is doing. Our society developed and currently maintains the policy of an all-volunteer military. Abandoning the concept of the citizen soldier in favor of the mercenary, we have placed ourselves in grave jeopardy. The military will inevitably become not only specialized in its function, but increasingly specialized in its psychology. A draft, involuntary service, is the only thing that can keep our military sane. I have spoken of the relationship between a specialized small
that's good, Jack.
such as Task Force Barker and the larger group that spawns it. Now let us turn to the large group itself. In this instance, the United States military. My purpose here is not to present a fully balanced picture of the military, but to examine one of the military's failures as an example of the phenomenon of group evil. Consequently, it is necessary to focus on the less savory aspects of the military mind, or soul. In a time of sustained peace, the military man is disregarded, at best considered by his country as a necessary evil, and more often as a rather pathetic parasite on the body politic. In a time of war, however, he suddenly becomes needed again, filling a role not only regarded as useful, but absolutely essential by his society. The drudge becomes the hero. It is inevitable, then, that the ordinary career military man, unconsciously if not consciously, desires, longs for war. War is his fulfillment. And in 1968, it was the military man that had to bear the full brunt of the exquisite pain of America's humiliation in Vietnam. It was the unvanquished military that was failing in the performance of its very raison d'etre. The pride of the military was badly wounded. Again and again, we have noted the birth of evil from a condition of threatened narcissism. For the military, the conditions were ripe for evil. Just as the highly narcissistic, evil individual will strike out to destroy whoever challenges his or her self-image of perfection, so by late 1967, the American military organization, highly narcissistic, as all groups tend to be, began to strike out with uncharacteristic viciousness and deceit against the Vietnamese people, who were wreaking such havoc on its self-esteem. Although the atrocity at My Lai was undoubtedly unique in magnitude, I have every reason to suspect that smaller atrocities were being committed by American troops throughout Vietnam at the time. I think we can safely say that My Lai occurred in the context of an atmosphere of atrociousness and evil that was pervasive not only in Task Force Barker, but throughout the entirety of the American presence in Vietnam. While the military may have been crashing around in Vietnam like a crazed bull, it did not get there of its own accord. The mindless beast was sent there and let loose by the United States government acting on behalf of the American people. Our military involvement in Vietnam began in the period between 1954 and 1956, when the idea of a monolithic communist menace seemed realistic. A dozen years later, it was no longer realistic. Yet at precisely the time when it had ceased to be realistic, when we should have been readjusting our strategy and withdrawing from Vietnam, we began to seriously escalate our military involvement there in defense of obsolescent attitudes. Why? Why, beginning around 1964, did America's behavior in Vietnam become increasingly unrealistic and inappropriate? There are two reasons: laziness and, once again, narcissism. I think we may properly regard the men who governed America at the time of My Lai, the Johnson administration, as lazy and self-satisfied. They, like most ordinary individuals, had little taste for intellectual confusion, nor for the effort involved in maintaining a, quote, posture of constant self-doubt and criticism, unquote. They assumed that the attitudes they had developed toward the monolithic communist menace during the preceding 2 decades were still the right attitudes. Although the evidence was obviously mounting to throw their attitudes into question, they ignored it. To do otherwise would have placed them in the painful and difficult position of having to rethink their attitudes. They did not take up the work required. It was easier to proceed blindly, as if nothing had changed. Thus far, we have been focusing on the laziness involved in clinging to attitudes that have become obsolete. Let us also examine the narcissism. We are our attitudes. If someone criticizes an attitude of mine, I feel he or she is criticizing me. If one of my opinions is proved wrong, then I have been proved wrong. My self-image of perfection has been shattered. Individuals and nations cling to obsolete and outworn ideas, not simply because it requires work to change them, but also because in their narcissism, they cannot imagine that their ideas and views could be wrong. When this happens, the nation, instead of readjusting in the light of the evidence, sets about attempting to destroy the evidence. This was what America was up to in the 1960s. The situation in Vietnam presented us with evidence of the fallibility of our worldview and the limits of our potency. So, rather than rethinking it, we set about to destroy the situation in Vietnam, and all of Vietnam with it, if necessary. Which was evil. Evil has already been defined most simply as the use of political power to destroy others for the purpose of defending or preserving the integrity of one's sick self. Since it had become outmoded, our monolithic view of communism was part of our national sick self, no longer adaptive and realistic. The issue ceased to be what was right for Vietnam and became an issue of our infallibility and preserving our national honor. Strangely enough, on a certain level, President Johnson and the men of his administration must have known what they were doing was evil. Otherwise, why all the lying? But it would be a mistake and a potentially evil rationalization itself for us to blame the evil of those days entirely on the Johnson administration. We must ask why Johnson was successful in defrauding us. Why were most of us not aroused to ire or suspicion or even significant concern about the nature of the war? Once again, we are confronted with our all-too-human laziness and narcissism. Basically, it was just too much trouble. We all had our lives to lead, doing our day-to-day jobs, buying new cars, painting our houses, sending our kids to college. As the majority of members of any group are content to let the leadership be exercised by the few, so as a citizenry, we were content to let the government do its thing. By allowing ourselves to be easily and blatantly defrauded, we as a whole people participated in the evil of the Johnson administration. The evil, the years of lying and manipulation of the Johnson administration was directly conducive to the whole atmosphere of lying and manipulation and evil that pervaded our presence in Vietnam during those years. It was in this atmosphere that My Lai occurred in March 1968. Task Force Barker was hardly even aware that it had run amok that day. But then America was not significantly aware either, in early 1968, that it too had almost unredeemably lost its bearings. Group evil is not just something that happened one morning in 1968 on the other side of the world. It is still happening all over the globe. It is happening here today. Like individual evil, group evil is common. In fact, it is more common. So common, indeed, it may be the norm. I began this discussion by noting how responsibility becomes diffused within groups, so much so that in larger groups it may become non-existent. Consider the large corporation. Even the president or chairman of the board will say, "My actions may not seem entirely ethical, but after all, they're not really a matter of my prerogative. I must be responsive to the stockholders, you know. On their account, I cannot help but be directed by the profit motive." Who is it then that determines the corporation's behavior? The small investor who does not even begin to understand the operations involved? The mutual fund on the other side of the nation? Which mutual fund? Which brokerage house? Which banker? We are living in the age of the institution. So, as they become larger and larger, our institutions become absolutely faceless, soulless. What happens when there is no soul? Is there just a vacuum? Or is there Satan, where once, long ago, a soul resided? I do not know, but I think that the anti-war activists, the Berrigan brothers, are correct when they say that the task before us is nothing less than to metaphorically exorcise our institutions. There is no word adequate to describe the urgency of this task. The military-industrial complex that played such a large role in Vietnam and continues to be a primary creator of the grotesqueness of the arms race is submitted to nothing but the profit motive. This is not submission at all. It is pure self-interest. I am not an enemy of capitalism per se. I believe it is possible for the profit motive to be operative and at the same time submitted to higher values of truth and love. Difficult, but possible. If we cannot somehow engineer this submission and, quote, Christianize, unquote, our capitalism, we are doomed as a capitalist society. The total failure of submission is always evil, for a group, for an institution, for a society, as for an individual. Unless we can heal ourselves by submission, the forces of death will win the day, and we will consume ourselves in our own evil. Our study of My Lai revealed the operation of gross intellectual laziness and pathological narcissism at every level. The task of preventing group evil, including war itself, is clearly the task of eradicating or at least significantly diminishing laziness and narcissism. The effort to prevent group evil, including war, is of course a process of education. This book was written in the hope that someday all children will be carefully taught that laziness and narcissism are at the very root of all human evil, and why this is so. They will come to know that the natural tendency of the individual in a group is to forfeit his or her ethical judgment to the leader, and that this tendency should be resisted. And they will finally see it as each individual's responsibility to continually examine himself or herself for laziness and narcissism, and then to purify themselves accordingly. They will do this in the knowledge that such personal purification is required not only for the salvation of their individual souls, but also for the salvation of the world. There are a variety of reasons we have not yet developed a psychology of evil. But perhaps the most important reason is the fear of the consequences. We have good reason to be afraid. There are real dangers inherent in the development of a psychology of evil. Anyone who seeks to participate in the endeavor of subjecting the phenomenon of evil to the scrutiny of science should begin by deeply considering that this endeavor in itself has potential for causing evil. Evil is a moral judgment. I am proposing that it may also be a scientific judgment, but making the judgment scientifically will not remove it from the moral sphere. The word is pejorative. Whether we call a man evil on the basis of pure opinion or on the basis of a standardized psychological test, we are passing a moral judgment. Shouldn't we refrain from doing either? Science is dangerous enough. Moral judgment is danger enough. How dare we mix the two in the light of Jesus' admonition, "Judge not that ye be not judged"? If we examine the matter more closely, however, we will see that it is both impossible and itself evil to totally refrain from making moral judgments. An attitude of "I'm okay, you're okay" may have a certain place in facilitating our social relationships, but only a place. Let us look at everyday life. What kind of father would I be if I discovered my son cheating, lying, or stealing, and failed to criticize him? What should I tell a friend who is planning suicide, or a patient who is selling heroin? You're okay? There is such a thing as an excess of sympathy, an excess of tolerance, an excess of permissiveness. The fact of the matter is that we cannot lead decent lives without making judgments in general and moral judgments in particular. We must also remember the purpose for which we judge. If it is to heal, fine. If it is to enhance our own self-esteem, our pride, then the purpose is wrong. "There, but for the grace of God, go I," is a reflection that should accompany every judgment of another's evil. While we may never ultimately discern the meaning of human existence, including just why this person is good and the other evil, it still remains our responsibility to live as best we can, which also means to go on making the moral judgments necessary to support life. The issue, then, is not whether to judge. We must. The question is how and when to judge wisely. Our great spiritual leaders have given us the basics. But since in the end we must make moral judgments, it makes sense to further refine our wisdom with the application of scientific method and knowledge of evil when appropriate, as long as we remember the basics. Many experiences have taught me that the current belief of some scientists. We are accustomed to regard science as truth with a capital.
All right.
What scientific knowledge, in fact.
So what are everybody's thoughts on that? Just some different things that stood out to you, anything at all?
One thing to me is that it happened so many other times since then that we know of. I was watching a show on television, Black Earth Rising. It was about Rwanda and the massacre there some years ago. As you recall, two groups, the Hutsis and the Tutsis and the, well, I can't remember, Hutsis and the Tutsis. Two minority groups went to war, and tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, were massacred in the course of a day or just a couple of days. And of course, in the show, they were looking for people that were specifically the instigators of this massacre. But it turned out that the main instigator was just an old man that he can hardly remember it anymore. And who do you blame then? It was a force bigger than any one person or any few people, almost a force that was contagious. And what I'm wondering is if, say, anybody here has ever experienced anything like that personally.
I think that being in a unit, being in a group, like he's talking about group evil, you have there is a peer pressure to do what the group is saying and what the group believes, and to go along with that. I mean, it can be something as simple as, you try to be a lot of people try to be a good Christian or whatever it is, but then, when they go to work and somebody's making jokes that they shouldn't participate in, or doing something, or, whatever that is, that it's just easy to keep your mouth shut or even go along with it. Or if you're feeling like you want to be approved of, to even be an instigator of that. Let alone what he was talking about in the military, and they're, openly promoting you to do these things, to think this way. I mean, one of the things that stood out to me in joining when I was still in high school, there was a day once I was already going to the Marine Corps and had taken the tests and had signed the papers. There was a day where you could go with a bunch of other high schoolers, and you could go on a run, like you were going to go on in the Marines, and kind of get used to that and see what it was going to be like or whatever, and this program they were doing. And I was just, so we get there, and they say, okay, we're going to do cadence. So, I'm going to say something, and then you guys are going to sing it back, and you know how running cadence goes. And I was just amazed at the grotesqueness of the lyrics of the cadence, because from day one, they're just putting into you, kill, kill, kill. And I was just appalled by it. Like, wow, like it just, as a high school senior, I was thinking that is insane. I'm more of the, I would have been raised in, even though I was out in California at the time, I was raised in the South, and, God, country, and family, and you protect your country and this and that, but you don't promote killing for the sake of making it seemingly benign to you, so that you have no feelings. So I think that just in general, there is peer pressure when there's a group. And I don't think that I seriously believe, and I think science bears this out, at least in certain areas, that it is not just a something that doesn't really exist, but that you feel. I think it is a physical existence. There is a measurable, it's almost like when somebody gets in your personal space, because it's about 2 feet, because your heart creates an electronic force field that's 2 feet around you. So when somebody gets within inside of those, that electricity going off on you, and their electricity hits that electricity, then sometimes, you're like, hey, give me some space or whatever. Well, in the same way, when a whole group thinks or feels something, there's a physical manifestation of that. I think that happens in these kind of situations. I don't know if anybody agrees or disagrees or has any thoughts on that.
Hey, Rich. I totally agree with you on that, because this thing that, who was that guy? Was that Chuck Colson? Who was that?
No, that was M. Scott Peck.
M. Scott Peck. Well, one of the things that he talked about was how in groups we could become blind to what is going on. And it's a concept that I've heard time and time again. It's called groupthink. And people will get involved in this type of groupthink. And if they feel that their space is being invaded, they will do whatever they can to protect that space, even if these things are wrong. So this extends to more than just the military. Hold on 1 second. Let me put this in and I'll be ready to go. So this extends to more than just the military. This extends to, can you hear me? Okay, this extends to other groups that we're involved in, whether it's fraternal organizations. I would consider the military a type of fraternal organization, civic organizations, religious organizations, and even what's the other group? There's another group, political organizations, where we will come together and we won't see the broader picture. And we will get caught up in this group think, and we're doing and saying things that are just irrational. And it's a dangerous thing. And even with some of the innocent things, it can become a problem. So it's something that we have to be careful of as believers.
Absolutely. Anybody else have any comments on group evil? I want to take it somewhere. I know we're already at 1 o'clock. I want to take it somewhere in a minute.
Thinking about children.
What's that?
Children and bullying.
Yeah.
I had something I was thinking about while I was playing is that where this kind of stuff stems from. And it may not be everything, but take the military and wars and stuff like that. You know, you take that down to the politics, and it's the politics that decided we should go to war, decided we should have, you know, a standing army or whatever it may be. Not that it's right or wrong, but just they decided that. And then if you take it back, it's the people deciding that they should decide what the laws are. So I think, you know, somewhere at the root of stuff like this is people deciding for themselves what's right and wrong, which is what causes it to become the normal, which is what causes the group thing. Whereas if you just let God's commandments stand as they are and let his way stand as they are and what is written stand as what is written, then, you know, there's no picking sides. There's no political parties. There's no two sides of a war. There's none of these divisions. It's all one and yeah.
But you know what? That they use these cliches or these scriptures to justify, in many cases, what they do. I'll give you an example. What do you think the battle hymn of the Republic comes from? It comes from this type of group think mentality that they picked up from the scriptures. How do you think they justified the use of slavery for the Indians and others? They took the scriptures and they used the scriptures to justify that. I don't disagree.
Right, they did. But then they wrote their own version of it. You know,
That's
like
correct.
Laws on slavery. They wrote their own laws for how they would govern slavery instead of letting the word of God stand as it is. And there's so many different things that if the word of God stood as it was and they weren't rewriting it and saying, this is what I think it means and this is how I think it should be applied, then these kind of divisions and parties and factions, you know, even if they arose, you still were looking at the same document and the same words. So, I mean, you know, if two people love each other like it says, then they should be able to come together given enough effort.
Yeah. Anyone else? Ann?
I'm wondering about following orders. I've seen this in the yard, and I feel that respect must be given to our leaders. Sometimes following orders comes back to crush us.
All right. One thing I want to take it to, and that I've, the last time that we did listen to this, and there was a smaller group, and it's kind of all come on the national scene. It's come to a point of the very point that we were talking about, and the idea of group evil And, as people in America, M. Scott Peck, right there, as he was reading his own book, pulled no punches and saying the American people were responsible for the massacre at My Lai. And that in one way kind of feels wrong. Like some Americans didn't even know that it was going on. Of course, most didn't. But at the same time, Americans are voting in these people, and these people are in charge, and then these people are doing these things. And so who else is responsible? Because are there different levels of responsibility? Most certainly. But saying that the American people are responsible for this. And so then that from listening to that last time, that led me to think, just in general about abortion. But lately, over the last week and a half, with New York doing its evilness, and then with the Virginia representative putting in, their law that they want to get voted on, their proposal, and then having to answer the questions: will this mean this? Yes, it will mean that, which is killing a baby outside of the womb. And this idea that, and there's a lot of outrage, and I see the outrage on Facebook. I see the outrage. There's some really good points being made. There's some things on Twitter where people are going back and forth and showing how absurd it is and all of that. But is that enough to be outraged on Twitter and Facebook? Is that enough? Are we okay with that? Or are we involved in some kind of group think, some group evil, to where the group wants you to be okay with any abortion, but they'll accept you not being okay with it as long as you don't do any actions to stop it?
Hey, Richard, Rich,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I think you're right. I don't know. I didn't hear everything that M. Scott Peck that he was saying, but I haven't heard the whole recording. I want to, but there are evils, of course, that he's talking about in the same time period of Vietnam that were happening right here in the United States. And are we responsible for them, regardless of if you are in North or South? So I just gave you a hint of what was going on. Talking about Jim Crow, talking about all that stuff. It's those are group think issues as well. Lynchings are ultimate evil of groupthink. Whether it be a black person, whether it be an Irishman, whether it be whatever, when mobs come together to do things like this, it is the evil of groupthink. And there's even a mention in I think it's the book of Acts somewhere, or it says these people came together. They didn't even know why they were there. They just kind of showed up, like they were drawn by something. Like you said, it was a force that draws you in. Instead of running away from the incident, everybody's coming to see it.
I also noticed, Rich, that in his recitation, he asked, he talked about the American people being responsible for what happened at My Lai. And I thought to myself, as the child of somebody, of civil rights leaders and the grandchild of civil rights leaders, I'm like, wait a minute, hold on. My parents and my grandparents, they were fighting for their lives during this time. So I'd like to see if we could expound upon how the entirety of American society became responsible for what happened over Vietnam, and particularly My Lai.
Well, I think that ultimately, whatever you allow, even if you verbally say and think inside of your head that you disagree with it, if you allow it, you are actually okay with it. That might not be in every instance. You could see, hey, if somebody's a slave or an imprisoned and they're allowing something, then then it would be, it would be, you wouldn't have any control over that. But okay, let's just take our current situation here. Abortion. This group, how many people are here? 15 people. All of us as a collective group, and we are actually in a group, the Yahad think tank. So we are a group of people, we're connected. We are okay with this is where we are. We are okay with being disgusted with abortion and never wanting to get or have our spouse get an abortion, and to teach our kids not that it's evil. But we are okay with abortions in America because all we do is talk about it. There is no action. Maybe somebody stands outside of their abortion clinic. Maybe somebody, supports their local state's right to life chapter. But we are okay with that. And my question is that okay? Are we okay with being okay with that as a group?
Can I talk to that a little bit?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, because that's an issue that has been near and dear to me for a long time, and wanting to do just exactly what you said, actually do something about it, and trying to actually found a ministry here that, supports crisis pregnancies, and done some volunteering there, and trying to, I guess, help on the other side. Oftentimes we are criticized that we, just as you said, talk about it a lot, but we don't do anything to help women that are in, that quagmire of trying to figure out what to do when they have an unplanned pregnancy. But along with that, something that the conclusion that he drew as far as Americans being responsible that were responsible for that were two things, which was laziness and narcissism. And I think that's rather sobering, because we tend to, maybe when it's in our face, or that's something that's going on, as has been happening this week, we tend to get up in arms about it, but then we go on with our daily lives, and we tend to ourselves and our own, and we don't take the gumption or take the initiative to actually speak out, or actually take some kind of action. And it's also related to Holocaust Remembrance Day was this past week as well. And something that was really, I thought, a rather poignant saying was a post on Instagram by Nikki Haley. And I pulled it up, where she says, "Today is not a day to remember a terrible time in history. It is a day we renew our promise to never let something like this happen again. Racism or isolation of a group of people based on religion, skin color, or background needs to be fought every day. 6 million Jews were murdered because some chose to look the other way. We must always take a side." And I think that's where the challenge is to us, is to not just look at history or look at what's happening even in current events, but to somehow figure out what our role in, making a change is. And again, back to the abortion issue, is there's groups like the Susan B. Anthony list that they exist basically to get pro-life women, especially, elected to Congress, where you can actually, see some changes being made, along with trying to, educate people and get the facts out to people, because even with all the laws passed on this, it's still up to the parents, it's up to the woman. Let's go after her heart, let's go after her head, and, get the information, make the persuasive case for keeping the baby, for putting the baby up for adoption. There's really so many small things, I think, that we don't realize we can do. We look at the great huge problem and we shake our heads and we cry and we pray, but small little steps, even in that sort of situation, can change. It can change people. It can change situations.
Amen. Can I piggyback off of that, Rich? In my prayer this morning, we prayed about that very same thing. And as you were talking, Marcel, one of the things that I find upsetting, and it really bothers me. I like young people. I love children. I love to be around children. But one of the things that really upset me concerning that issue was the amount of clergy that we see coming out now in favor of abortion. And you talked about little things that we can do, the little ways that we can get involved. The word commands us to be always on the side of holiness and to take care of the widows, orphans, and those that cannot take care or protect themselves. These babies, I love to, when I go to the store, to pray for and bless children when I'm in the store. But these are gifts that have been given to us, and we have to be on the side of those children as scenes. And so I think that maybe we need to look at ways, like small ways, and increase over time to get involved and to stand up and say, no, this is not holiness. This is not righteous, and this is not godly. And we need to, I'd like to see us trying to find more ways that we can get involved locally or even nationally.
Look at Paul Hill. Was Paul Hill a transgressor or a hero? You know who Paul Hill is?
Yeah, I mean, with him, I think that to me, that's no different than, the Muslims throwing homosexuals off third-story buildings. I mean, even in the Torah, there is a due process. There's witnesses. There's people. There's a way to do it. So I think that he definitely did it wrong. Although I think that there were some things about his way of thinking that were correct that we don't have as a society. But certainly, I don't think he did it correctly.
Well, see, that it's fine enough for the other side to kill as many people as they want. But
Okay.
if anybody on this side, not that I'm advocating to do that, but if anybody on this side, they're condemned. And really, when you weigh the scales of the ethics, I would think that people that are in abortion as an industry would be far more culpable than one guy that gets executed because he executed a few people that were involved in it. Just something to think about.
Well, one of the things that I've tried to do since moving here, I moved from Oregon, and Oregon is very pro-choice, very, and I tried to get. I spoke with the Oregon Right to Life director there because they're just getting killed, but they don't really want to change the way they're doing things, even though they're getting killed. So I've I've just contacted Tennessee Right to Life. And trying to get in with them and seeing if I can help them in any way. But my point is that if I can't, then other than giving them funds or helping them out a little bit here or there, then I'm seriously thinking about doing something. I've got certain things in place already where I could do something more than just. I mean, I get what I guess my thinking is trying to be different. Some people are doing nothing. Some people, like Marcel said and has done, and I know other people do with the crisis pregnancy and the help them see what it is, help them see what it would be to abort, help them see what adoption would be, walk them through some things. And man, there's a huge place for that. But to me, there's just a lack of offense in the political realm, in the pro-life arena. There is no offense. Everything is playing defense, to where we're to the point where we've got a governor in Virginia that they're asking to resign because he was in a picture dressed up apparently for some frat party or Halloween party or something, where there's a guy dressed up as a KKK member and a guy dressed up as a blackface. But nobody's irate that he just said we need to agree to disagree, that I think it's okay to kill a baby in a hospital room that's just been born because the mother wanted it aborted 10 minutes ago and the abortion didn't go right, so it got born. And that's between the doctor and the mom if they want to make it as comfortable as possible while they talk about it. That's where we are as a society. That they don't want him to resign because he said that. They want him to resign because he's in a picture 30 years ago that is deemed inappropriate.
And hey, Rich, something like that happened just recently in the state of Florida. The Florida Secretary of State had to also resign because he was in a picture at a Halloween costume contest in blackface. So it's like we're not focusing on the things that really matter. We're really focusing as a society on very dumb and very stupid things. And somehow, murdering a child is acceptable. Somehow allowing young people to get a hold of fentanyl and murder them and kill themselves is acceptable. You know, that's why I believe Essenes are called to a high standard of holiness, because it looks like this society as a whole is coming apart at the seams. And as I said earlier, even the clergy now have become involved in this foolishness. They become culpable.
When I think about this topic, and what can be done about it, I think, practical terms, what can you really do? Well, you got options. You can go physically stop a woman from having an abortion. Well, I wouldn't advocate that. Then you have, you can try to tell everybody that's around you, speak of his ways when you rise, when you walk by the way, and when you lay down. That includes everyone around you, and maybe, Facebook, you get a couple hundred people or however many friends you have on there or whatever, and, you talk about his ways and make these things known. But when I look at the grander scheme of where we are we in the kingdom? Are we in that place where the laws are right? And I think, no, we're foreigners here, that we're citizens of a kingdom that's not of this world. And, we could try to get into politics and change it and, get on, big world platforms and this and that. But in order to do that, you kind of have to be involved in politics. But when you start doing that, then you're relying on a majority vote to change, the status quo of the law or whatever it may be. Now, it says that, the way is hard and difficult and few will find it. And the gate is narrow, and many will go by the wide way. So I think it seems that we're going to be in the minority if we're following the way, if we're doing the right thing, if we would stand for the right thing, when it comes to abortion or any other thing. That since we're in the minority, I don't think we could ever force it on the majority. And I think that's a futile attempt. And I think that, you do your best. You speak of it when you rise, when you walk by the way, and when you lay down. Maybe tell whoever you can, get the word out about God and everything. But, what can you really do beyond that? Because even the apostles and people who, had the Holy Spirit in them that were making literally blind people see and healing people that were like injured and stuff like that. I'm not saying that stuff doesn't happen today. I'm just saying even them, did they go and change the laws? Did they, have a political force? Did they raise an army? They did, but it was in a spiritual way where you don't force anyone, because you can't force anyone. This is a spiritual matter. And they have to come to it because they believe the truth.
Well, I think.
Hold on one second. I think that you're right, Desmond. What you're saying is correct. Like the facts that you gave are correct, but I think that it cuts both ways. yes, if you do go the political route, you're dependent upon politics, votes, and all of this kind of stuff. But in another kind of society, say if we were in Rome in Israel in the first century, and Rome was in charge of us, we wouldn't have any say at all. So now that we do have some say, do we say, oh, we're not going to go that route because it takes a majority vote? I think that's the wrong way to look at it. I think that the reason the pro-choice movement is so huge is because they went that route, and they pushed 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 until they are where they are. And so I think it's certainly not what we're doing. We don't go, we just look at somebody on, the news that says something stupid, and we go, man, that's stupid. The other side looks at somebody who says something that they disagree with, and they get out in the streets and they mob and they do this and they lobby and they protest and they politic, and they get their way. And then we just sit back and go, oh, it's stupid. And so we're losing our country because of that. And I hear, I see some of the comments in the chat. I see what Ann is saying. We cannot legislate morality, and I get that side of it. But on the other side of it is you have to legislate morality. It doesn't mean that person, you can't legislate it in their heart, and that's what Ann is saying, but you have to legislate. That's what the 10 Commandments are. That is the lowest level of morality that is acceptable in a society that wants approval by Yahweh.
Exactly.
And so you have to have that standard. If somebody doesn't want to do it in their heart, like Ann is saying, that legislation is not going to cause their heart to change. But it has to be legislated. It has to be written. And right now, the way our morality is, it's not okay to dress up in the mid-'80s in some stupid costume, but it's okay to kill a baby. And that's just the facts of the matter. So I just don't know. Here's, I guess, my question. If I start something, if I start something, and I mean start an organization that is pro-life and is going to get mixed up in the political arena, get mixed up in the advertising arena, get mixed up in all of that kind of stuff, with whatever skills or influence or whatever, would that be something that people here would try to support and help, as long as I wasn't, as long as the direction of it was consistent and accurate towards the truth of Elohim?
I absolutely would.
Absolutely.
I have a very strong opinion about kind of like what you said and on what Desmond said, the mentality. And this is one of the reasons I've studied eschatology and I have carried the belief that I do, is because I think it affects the way you live now. And if we are understanding and if we believe that Yeshua's coming to this earth and the revolution that he started and bringing the kingdom now, did that do anything? I still going over the quote that was in Jackson's message about thinking about and considering what his first coming did before we speculate on his second. It seems that whole idea that this earth is not our home, or this is just really not Hebraic. It's not a biblical thought. Our ancestors were not looking for a way to escape. They were looking for the kingdom here. And I think that if we realize the power and the authority that the master left us, then we will be more apt to bring about and continue the work that he started in bringing the kingdom. And that includes being involved. I mean, history is on the side. If you look at William Wilberforce, our own civil rights movement, even during Prohibition and what happened with when their alcohol was banned and how, there was less complications with all kinds of diseases and things with alcohol because of that law. Laws do make a difference. Of course, we can't force people to do anything, but I think to minimize the fact that we can't legislate, that we can't have righteous people. I know a homeschool dad that's in Congress right now. I knew him well for 4 years, and he's a righteous man. And to say that we as believers can't be in the majority, so we shouldn't do anything, I just think it's part of what M. Scott Peck was saying. it's laziness, it's narcissism in our own little way, in our own little religious way. We're going to be little religious narcissists and, you know, do our own thing because we're not going to be effective anyway. That's not what Yeshua came to do. That's not what he empowered us to do, greater things than he did.
Amen.
So I'm going to stop because I get so passionate about that kind of
Can I
thing.
piggyback on what you're saying, Marcel?
Quickly, Daniel, quickly.
Let me piggyback on this, because this is exactly what she's saying. We need to understand that the apostles, they confronted their foes. They didn't just hang back in the woods and worry about the chemtrails and the different things that are going to affect them. They affected change. That's why their ministry grew. They got out there. I mean, you look at the Nazarene Acts. There was a confrontation on the steps of the temple, and they confronted them about the error of the Pharisees in the temple leadership. So we've got to get involved some kind of way and not hide, because we are soldiers in the army of Yahweh. We are not people that should be hiding under a rock and hoping that Yeshua comes and ends it all. We have a responsibility to help build this kingdom. And if we believe that, we need to do that.
Okay, let me do this. I'm going to share my screen real quick here. And I just want to show you, can you guys see that right there? You see this guy here?
What are you showing, Rich?
I'm showing, I think he's a U.S. Army officer, Thompson. And then here we have Crew Chief Glenn Andriota. And we have Callie as well.
Callie.
Galley. Is it Galley?
No, when you put his picture on, it all just flashed back to me.
Yeah. What is it?
Yeah.
What is it, Jackson?
William Callie. He's the guy that was prosecuted for the Lai Massacre.
Here we have different people. This guy right here, Thompson, actually from his helicopter saw what was going on and started barking orders at people to stop doing what they were doing, and went so far with this guy was on his crew, this Glenn Andriota. They grabbed people from My Lai, put them in their helicopter, like Vietnamese,
Wow.
and rescued them to safety. And he called back to the headquarters and told them what was happening. Hugh Thompson did. And they did not stop it the first time, which is just amazing to me. And then he called back again. And then finally, once he got out of Vietnam and made it back to the States, he is the reason that we know about My Lai. Hugh Thompson Jr. Whereas other people got prosecuted for not putting a stop to it when it was their responsibility to put a stop to it. And it's as simple as, let me move this here. It's as simple as Matthew 25. Before him, all the ethnics will be gathered, and he will separate them one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats are on his left. Then he will say to those on his right hand, "Come, blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world." Why? Because your doctrine is right, because you have your 16 fundamental truths, or you belong to the right organization. No, none of that. For I was hungry, and you gave me food to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me to drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in.
Yes, sir.
Right? Mm-hmm. So Thompson could not even know who the Elohim of Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov is, but he took in the stranger when they were needed, and he got them to safety. Me and you, we know who the Elohim is, and we're deciding whether or not we want to help out against abortion. Then, okay, let me just keep reading. Then I will look to those. Wait a minute, where are we? Then the righteous will answer him, saying, Lord, when did we see you in all these things? When you did it to the least of these, my brothers, you did it to me. Verse 41, then I will say to those on my left hand, depart from me, you cursed, into the eternal fire, which is prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you didn't give me food to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me no drink. I was a stranger, and you didn't take me in. Hey, when did we see you? When did we see you? Most certainly I tell you, because you didn't do it to one of the least of these, you didn't do it to me. These will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. And I know that verse 46 is it can be translated different, but the point is that we have to do, if it's in our power to do good and we don't do it, to us it is sin. If it's in our power to do good, and this goes back to last week. Last week we talked about personal evil, and that's the correlation I was trying to make. If in the little areas of your personal life you do sin and don't correct it, then I think you have a much harder time doing good things in group think when there's group evil going on, because of the little areas that you're not doing it in your personal life. The little areas where I'm not doing it in my personal life, it makes it harder for me to resist the group evil. But if I'm doing things correctly in my personal life behind the scenes when nobody's looking, then when I see a big problem of group evil like abortion or whatever, then it makes me want to try to figure out a way to do something rather than sit on my hands.
I think this idea of reaching this problem of abortion is going to be done through the women themselves, the women and the fathers, of course, but mostly the women, because they have the choice according to the law of America. But to have them, or to have their attention, to be able to speak to them, to be able to share the truth with them, to be able to share the hope with them and the Savior with them. How do you foresee getting that done in a practical way? Like, is there a way to get names of people getting abortions, or just like go down to the abortion clinic and hold up a sign that says, like there are other options type thing? Or
I think there's all kinds of stuff. I think that if we were to say, hey, here's a strategy and this is what we're going to do, my first 3 points would be, number one, start going down to your city council meetings, start finding out who's pro-choice and pro-life, and then start approaching the people that are pro-life and try to help them figure out ways. Like, for instance, I would say, hey, they tax gas, they tax cigarettes. We want to put a tax on abortions that is so high that people will go to a different city to do abortions than in this city. Then we go to the county and we do it in that county. Then we go to the state level. And then we go, okay, so if the feds are going to say we have to make it legal, then it's like cigarettes. We're going to make it as hard as possible to buy these things. And so we, by default, like the taxes are so high in California that capitalist organizations are fleeing out of there left and right, because it's too hard to make money, because it's all a money thing from one side of it, and from the other side of it, it's a eugenics racist thing. But from one side of it, it's just a money thing. And so that would be number one. Number two is I would begin to do something on the local level, like Marcel's talking about, where me and my family are doing something to help crisis pregnancy, or helping out with orphans and widows, or whatever it is, so we can see that the people need help and we're going to stand up for them. And then third, I think you could do something more extreme if you wanted to, as far as a civil disobedience. And what that means is you purposely do something illegal so that you tell the authorities, basically, you have the authorities there, I'm going to stop this abortion, and then you arrest me, and we're going to put this through the courts, and we're going to try to get this changed to show that this is reprehensible, and this is something along those lines. A civil disobedience, I'm not talking about like blowing up an abortion place or anything stupid like that. I'm talking about I think we can do those things. Desmond, you can go to your city council. I can go to my city council. That's something that we can do. In different cities, you might go to yours and it's like, hey, most people are pro-life on the city council, and they're going to start voting on these things and making them happen. And I'm going to go to mine, and maybe they're all pro-choice and they stone cold me. I mean, it's not going to be, that doesn't make me bad and you good. It's just, there's going to be certain wins and certain losses. But if we don't start doing these things, then yeah, I think that we're back to square one. We're not really doing anything. Anything else, Jackson? Anybody? I'll start getting together some stuff. I'm going to try to talk to Tennessee Right to Life this week to see if I can help them out in any way. But if not,
Rich, can I say something real quick?
That I'm going to do, then I will look at starting something, personally. But yeah, go ahead.
Can you hear me? Okay, I think that can you hear me? Okay, I think that one of the things that the abortion issue is just one of the issues, but I put some things in the chat, some things that we can begin to do. I mean, you can go out and feed the homeless. You could get involved in political organizations locally. You could join ministerial alliances. You that are ordained, you need to know other ministers in your community. That's how you're going to get the information in your local community as to who needs help, who is in distress, what the issues are that you as an SC need to be that need to be standing up about. The reason why a lot of us are having trouble with these types of issues is because a lot of us have come to the Hebrew roots realm, and where they told you, you sit in a room, you listen to somebody talk at you about doctrine and belief, and you're isolated and you don't know what's really going on in the earth. We're called to be the light of the world, per John chapter 1. And we need to be seeking others that have that light and witnessing to them and doing Torah mitzvot. So take some time this week. Look at the different organizations and things that are already out doing things and get involved there. I mean, go to your city and county, your city council meetings, go to your county commission meetings, go to your state legislatures if need be, and get to know who those people are. Talk to them. You don't have to vomit all over them at once, but you can share, hey, this is what I believe. How can I get involved and how can I help? So it's about being a lifeline to somebody, not somebody that hides in a bunker, that's worrying about all these things that don't matter, and not being effective as a minister or as even a person who believes. So, my thoughts.
All right, Jackson, do we have a speaker for next week, or are we just doing our regular forum?
No speaker, do a regular forum. We can continue on this. I think that'd be a good idea if you're going to put in for an organization or something like that.
Yeah, let me visit with the Right to Life. I know that right now that they're Tennessee is doing a little better than some other states. There are only 3 Planned Parenthoods. One of them is not doing abortions right now, and because of something I think that Tennessee Right to Life is helping with, but I'm not sure about that. But anyway, so I grab it while it's hot, and if they've got the organization and they've got the structure and they've got the contacts and we can help out that way in this state, then I'm all for it. But if they're just gonna, and I don't know, I haven't talked to them, but if it's not going to be something that's going to be advocating, ending this completely and finding ways to do that politically as quickly as possible, then yeah, I will be looking into something.
Great.
Personal.
Okay, then let's dismiss until then. Thank you for coming. Very good input from all that are here. And we'll see you next time. May Yahweh be with you. Enjoy the rest of your Shabbat.